Evening, Alistair. Evening, everybody. Are you okay?
Very well, Ash. Thanks very much for coming on. And at this time, when who would have thought that Alex Salmond, who is a presence in so many people's lives, would suddenly depart the scene so immediately? And did it come as a shock to you?
Yeah, it did actually. Yeah, I mean, every time I've seen him, I mean, he used to appear quite a bit on Talk TV with Mike Graham, and I believe the two of them are quite good friends. And he always seemed fairly full of life and pretty chipper. So yeah, I mean, he talked a lot of rubbish, obviously, but he always came across as pretty full of life. Yeah, I was very surprised to hear that he passed away. I was actually quite surprised to hear he was 69. I didn't realize he was that old, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
No disrespect to anyone that is, of course.
Yes. Well, he's just been a presence, and that's using a nice term in our lives for a very long time. And the last time he spoke publicly in Scotland, I think, was at the Tommy Sheridan rally a couple of months ago, maybe, if that, in George Square. No, back in September in George Square. And he was certainly looking like he was packing on the beef anyway at that particular event. And so he ends up in North Macedonia giving a lecture. And I don't know what his lecture was about, but I'm sure he was up to no good, because Macedonia separated from Yugoslavia, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A few years ago, and so he would see Macedonia as some kind of ally, probably, for the Scottish cause as he sees it. But you produced a video on it. What did you say in the video, and how was it received?
I did a video saying that Alex Salmond actually deserves respect from people, and I've had a dog's abuse ever since I made it. But I'm not rowing back on it. I mean, I'm not one to speak ill of the dead either. I mean, I don't, like yourself and like most of the people I speak to in Scotland, I'm diametrically opposed to Alex Salmond and pretty much everything that he stood for. But you've got to appreciate as well, or at least acknowledge, a talented politician, for that is what he was. And even people that I know who are unionists and they're not supporters of Scottish independence, lots of them say he was a better First Minister than some of the crap that's followed him, with Sturgeon and Swinney and Useless Yusuf. So at least, let's afford the guy a little bit of respect in death at least. He did bring in free tuition fees. I mean, that's turned out to be a bit of a disaster, to be honest with you, for Scottish students, but at least he tried. And he did bring in free prescriptions, which the SNP are now getting rid of. But again, it was something that was a positive policy. He didn't literally spend his entire time talking about breaking up the UK. And although I don't like this, he was the only person to win a majority in Holyrood, when, of course, it's a system designed really for people not to have a majority. So there was talent there. It was just misguided talent. Let's put it that way.
Yes, I think so. I think misguided is the word. And to think, if he had put his talent into bringing the British people together, it would be a different country, But even if he had become like a Labour politician, say, he would have done extremely well. I believe, my understanding is that when he was growing up, he was born in Lithgow. When he was growing up, his father was a Labour supporter and his mother was a Conservative supporter. And how the pair of them managed to stay together, who knows? However, they made their impact on young Alexander, and so he could have been a Conservative as well, but he chose the path of division. Unfortunately for us, that is, he chose that path. So, yeah, it's I totally agree with you in that he was an excellent politician in that sense, but it just shows the power of somebody that's got such skills, the power to take a country down, a bad route, as it were. And I think it was a bad route that they took the country down. I would not have liked to see that, really, but he gave expression to that nationalist attitude. And maybe we can be grateful that he didn't give it. He didn't, he didn't take it in a very bad way. you know, because that kind of nationalist attitude could go off the rails if you weren't careful. So I think he was always careful to control it to an extent.
One thing, of course, we can't forgive him for was the rise of Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, that was entirely his fault. But also, let's also be grateful that he himself, although he'd never admit it, was the one who killed the case for independence during the referendum. I do actually believe there was maybe through apathy, maybe for people not coming out to vote in big enough numbers at the time, there was a genuine danger that Scotland was going to vote to leave the UK. But it was Alex Salmond, let's not forget, who, when talking about the economic case, which he made quite strongly when it came to the North Sea oil and things like that, then he was asked about currency and he folded like, you know, a cheap suit. That really was a defining moment in the referendum campaign, and they could not think of an answer for what currency Scotland would use. They came up with all different sorts of reasons why they wouldn't go into the euro. They continued to use the pound, etc., and that really damaged them badly. So we can at least be grateful that Salmond didn't actually know that much about what he was talking about. He was just very ideologically driven.
Absolutely. That's a good point. Another thing that he had going for him is something called the British Civil Service, and I don't have it within reach, but he produced this massive doorstopper called Scotland's Future, which is an exact anagram of fraudulent costs. Exact anagram, which is almost, I mean, that's like, how could that be? But it's true. It is. But he didn't write a word of it. Maybe he wrote the preface to it, I think. But the rest of it was just us that paid the British civil servants to do all of this research, to answer all of the questions, and to publish this free book that you could send away for and get. And it's heavy. It weighs several pounds. And so he had everything behind him, like the entire might of the British state behind him. And we had nothing really other than David Cameron and Nick Clegg. It was the coalition government, I believe, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's who we had on our side. So it was like the least they say, the better, quite frankly. So we were kind of on our own up here against the might of the British civil service, doing everything at Alex Salmond's command.
I mean, to be fair, I think Cameron, to be fair, I think he got out and about, didn't he, and tried his best to fight the campaign. But, you know, he didn't live in Scotland. He wasn't Scottish. I don't think he understood the Scottish people or the psyche of the Scottish people. And the same can be said for Nick Clegg. So you're absolutely right. The odds were stacked against the unionist side, against our side, if you will.
Absolutely. They had everything. They had the question. They got to choose the question. They got to choose the day. They got to choose who could vote as well. Remember, they made 16-year-olds able to vote because the franchise had been devolved. So they could decide whoever wanted to vote. So they had everything going for them, and we had nothing going for us other than Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown, who were the two most vocal and generally effective speakers. And
Alistair Darling certainly was, yeah. He was a very good politician.
Yes. And also George Galloway, who was a bit of a fringe politician. But so the three of them were the kind of mouthpieces for the union, as well as the grassroots groups, such as A Force for Good and two or three other smaller groups as well, who did our best in whatever way we could at that time on, of course, no money or anything like that, but we did our best. And we won by almost 11%.
Yeah.
It was just within 11% of the vote, 10.8 or something like that, 10.6, I can't remember, percentage in the biggest ever vote in the history of Britain at the time, the biggest ever number of people voting. So that should have settled it, but it didn't settle it because Gordon Brown, unfortunately, had encouraged Cameron and his coalition partner to give a whole raft of new powers to the SNP. So that meant a whole new debate was structured around more powers for Holyrood, and a whole new debate about how these weren't enough powers and how Scotland was being cheated out of powers that Brown and Cameron had promised, and so on and so forth. And it just kept that pot boiling and boiling and boiling until the time of the next general election, which was within like a couple of years, and the SNP swept the board. So rather than them being crashing and burning onto some rocky, stony ground, they basically crashed onto a nice bouncy bed, and they bounced back up again, refreshed and ready to go once more. So that was a strategic error
This
as
is the
well.
problem, isn't it? It's, we've had, since that referendum, as you just pointed out, constant appeasement. And that is a real major issue we've got. And they're still asking for more powers now to do this and that with. I mean, you give them tax powers, what happens? They raise taxes. You give them the education, it's in the doldrums. It doesn't even appear on league tables anymore. When, you know, to say you had a Scottish education used to be a badge of honour to wear. It was one of the best educations you could get, probably the best in Europe at one time. Everything these people touch turns into a steaming pile of you-know-what. And this, you know, still asking for powers now, still asking for referendums now. I must admit, Swinney's taking a bit of a back seat on the independence thing because he knows it's just completely out of reach anyway. It's not going to happen. And he's probably not going to be leader after 2026 anyway. But I will say one thing about the SNP, unfortunately, and this is going to be Labour's fault, and I think you alluded to it earlier as well, actually, that, you know, Labour are really playing right into the hands of the SNP at the moment. The SNP really don't have to do a great deal. All they've got to do is sit back and point out everything that's going on inside Westminster. And as you said about the oil and gas industry, although the SNP can't really brag too much about that because they tried to get rid of it as well. But all the jobs that Labour are going to cost, the income that Labour are going to cost, the damage they're going to do to Britain's economy. And the SNP, if people aren't careful, the SNP are going to sweep the board at Holyrood in 2026.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this idea that they're going to be defeated, I'm not so sure about that at all. I think that the way things are going, it's probably going to be a hung parliament. I don't see Labour doing anything that's setting the woods on fire.
No.
I see them doing quite a bit that is going to upset some of their core voters. As I say, I mentioned the energy thing there. This real strong push for so-called green energy without allowing a proper transition period for the Scottish oil and gas. Do you have any thoughts on where that might go?
I made a video actually saying that Ed Miliband is probably the most dangerous man in Britain. People can look at Starmer because he's the figurehead of the government, but Starmer believes in nothing. He's not dangerous. He's just a fool who's led by the nose. Ed Miliband actually believes in this rubbish, and he is full steam ahead, trying to take away your boilers, trying to make you get expensive heat pumps, etc. He's absolutely willing to sacrifice those at least 240,000 jobs that rely on the oil and gas industry, from the people who work on the rigs to the lorry drivers who transport this stuff up and down the country. He does not care. He is willing to destroy the country if it means getting to net zero. He honestly doesn't care. He will destroy the Highlands. He will destroy parts of England like the Lake District with wind turbines, solar farms, all the rest of it. And that, as I said, politically, that's going to play into the hands of the SNP. But socially and economically for this country, it's going to be an absolute disaster. But I mean, economically, we are going to lose out on so much money. There's so much oil and gas there that we could be using. If you don't want to frack, fine. But at least, think about them towns around Aberdeen that need the hotels that might have people coming, workers staying there, or the bars and restaurants that rely on workers coming off the rigs and having a few pints and a meal and that. All this is going to be gone. Places like Aberdeen or the surrounding villages and towns will be wasteland afterwards. There'll be no reason for people to go there anymore, apart from the scenery.
Well, that's absolutely right. That's a good way of putting it. I was reading this article as well about the dangers, and Offshore Energy UK estimates that around 100,000 of the 220,000 jobs linked directly to North Sea oil and gas are in Scotland. You only need to look at the impact on hospitality and retail of the oil price shock of 2015 to see that large-scale job losses in oil and gas have significant knock-on consequences outside their own industry. Anything that negatively affects them disproportionately hits income tax receipts also. And income tax is devolved in Scotland. So if you wipe out that economy, you're not just making the cost of fuel higher, you're also lowering the income tax take that you would have got from people who were employed in and around that industry. So it could be very bad for Labour. The SNP, of course, are in a tricky situation because, as you said, under Sturgeon, they heavily pushed the end of all carbon industry in Scotland, carbon-based industry, fossil fuels and so on. Now that she's off the scene, they might be able to do a mea culpa. They might be able to turn around and go, oh, well, that was then, this is now, we've, seen the light. And if they've got any sense, then they will do that, and they will use this as a stick to beat Labour. But some of these people, I don't know if they even have any sense, and some of them are blinded by their ideology, and they would rather see the temple fall down upon them rather than change their view on certain things. So it's
Stephen Flynn's certainly trying to do that, and with good reason, of course. His seat is in Aberdeen, so he absolutely relies on those people voting for him. It's not exactly a vote winner to turn around and say, "I'm going to take away all your jobs and all your livelihoods." But there's actually a picture. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a picture from PMQs today where they compared the SNP to before the general election to now. And Stephen Flynn didn't even have a seat. He was just sat on the steps in the House of Commons because there wasn't any room for him. He must. There's rumours he's going to run to be an MSP, of course, and take over the SNP. I mean, whether that'll happen, I don't know. You could probably see it happening. But
yeah, I could see that happening. I can see that's where his ambition is probably going to be First Minister of Scotland. Absolutely. Just before we go on, I want to mention the competition that we had, and that the prizes are as many of these drink mats as you want. We'll send you a bundle of them, and also a light switch sticker in the shape of a Union Jack flag. Now that's totally original. Put on your lights in the morning and see the Union Jack flag whenever you hit your light switch. So the question, folks, send your answer to contact@forceforgood.uk. The question is, on this day, which children's programme was launched on the BBC in 1958? Okay, that's a good question for all of our generation that remembers it favourably. Good. Yeah, no. Just this article, which it was headed, Scottish rebellion is brewing against net zero in threat to Labour. And it points out, where is it? Shortly after the tragic comedy of Humza Yousaf's short-lived reign as First Minister, the SNP changed its policy on the North Sea from what was essentially the same as Labour's current uncompromising evisceration of the industry. I think that's a good phrase, uncompromising evisceration of the industry. This is our British government. This is how it's dealing with one of the fundamentals of national sovereignty, which is energy security. Another fundamental, of course, of national sovereignty is border control, neither of which our current government has shown much allegiance to, it has to be said. What does this bubble do? Says Flynn's the secret son of terror leader of the Fordham Baldies from the Wanderers. Okay, I know the Wanderers. I know what you're meaning. There's a chap in that. It's a 1970s film who's really got a shaved head. So I get it.
Relating to the what do you call it, the oil and gas industry. Did you know that we've actually had blackout warnings this week in Britain at a time when they're trying to cut down on our energy, which, as you just said, without energy security, you can't heat homes, you can't power buildings, you can't have a military, you can't do anything without energy security. And NESO, which is the National Energy System Operator, actually issued a blackout warning. I think it was on, what day are we on now, Wednesday? I think it was on Monday they issued the blackout warning. And that is the first time in years they've had to issue it.
Oh my!
Because and you know, is it any? I mean, sure to God, it can't come as a surprise to these politicians that in the winter you've got more darkness, you're going to use more energy, it's colder, people are going to heat their homes more. But Miliband, as I said, is still absolutely determined. Doesn't matter what effect it has on people. If, according to Labour's own research, if 4,000 pensioners have to die, then so be it. You know, they can't heat their homes. It's just, they don't care. They're not interested at all.
It's one of the problems that we have in a democracy is that there's so much short-termism, and governments get in, they inherit a problem from the past, and they're not thinking. They should be thinking, well, let's have a 25-year plan here. What's Britain going to look like in 25 years? And what are we going to need to literally plan for? Because if we're going to be building any power stations, we're going to have to start building them very, very soon. You know, this sort of thing. There's no long-term thinking, because it's like, well, we don't know who's going to be in power in 25 years. Somebody else can work it out. For me, I'm too busy today answering questions at the BBC or Sky News to actually sit down and figure out what to do. And so it's just like short-termism all the time, pivoting, as this article says, from one extreme to the other. The previous government claimed it wanted to max out on production. The new one seems intent on destroying it. This is not an environment conducive to the very long lead times that investment in offshore oil requires. That's the phrase, the very long lead times. And it's not just in oil that you need very long lead times. It's really in all sorts of planning, especially planning for housing and NHS provision and school provision and doctor and nurses provision and all that kind of stuff. It requires long lead times that our political leaders just don't seem to be applying themselves to address.
Well, as you said, they're going to be out of office. Well, Labour will certainly be gone by the next election. So they don't care about what's going to happen after that. They don't care about the next 20 years. I don't just blame Labour for this either, by the way. I also blame the Conservative Party and the Lib Dems for this. When they were in coalition, they were told that they needed to build new nuclear power stations to keep this country energy secure. And that was 2012, I think. And somebody turned around to the government and said, we can have it built and online by 2022, I think it was. And Nick Clegg turned around and blocked it, because he said there's no point doing that because we won't be in government by then, which just sums up, which backs up your point. Maybe there's certain things that shouldn't be allowed, that shouldn't be the responsibility of unqualified politicians who just want to grandstand. Things like energy security are far too important to be left to a lot of people who simply don't have any qualifications and have won a glorified popularity contest for 5 years to go and earn a good salary in Parliament.
Do you know that that's a good point that you make? It would be good if we probably do have, well, we don't have, but these national energy bodies, departments should be tasked with a long-term plan and basically just left to it.
Yeah.
Keep the lights on, do what you need to do, and build it up in proportion to the number of people that are in the country and all that kind of stuff, and just leave the politicians out of it. And the politicians should really only get involved if something's going seriously wrong somewhere.
If there's corruption, for example, needs to be investigated or something, fine, do that. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's quite a good way of thinking about it, because, and you look, we played a video there of Boris Johnson talking about how he thought it was important to bring in all these hundreds of thousands of people to keep inflation low. But, well, okay, so the inflation, which is a number on a piece of paper, is kept low. But what about, where are the houses? Where are the schools? What's the condition of the NHS to serve all these people? And when are these people leaving? Not bringing them in on short-term contracts, just bringing them in. So we put too much faith in the idea that somebody gets elected to Parliament and they know it all. I mean, they know in most cases less than you and I. Well, in every case, really, less than you and I.
We've got a chancellor that's a failed banker. We've got Wes Streeting, who, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he used to be a hairdresser running the NHS. Keir Starmer used to prosecute people, and now he's head of the country somehow. Jeremy Hunt was the previous chancellor. He'd never run a business. This job requires no qualifications, no set hours of work. All you've got to do is go out there and blag a load of people with a manifesto and tell them you're going to do them some good. And whether you do or not, you're going to be sat there for 5 years, and then I think you get a pension after it as well. You get paid off handsomely when you get voted out. We have a bunch of unqualified people running this country, and we can't rely on the civil service. Me and you have said this before. There's definitely a case in this country for having an American-style civil service where you bring in politically not nominated, but nominated by the party candidates to run in and run different parts of the service, because these people in the civil service have been sat there for so long, a bit like Sir Humphrey Appleby, in Yes Minister, and that they've been sat there for so long. They're simply in the job because it was their turn, etc. And that's the kind of system we have. The American system is far better than the one we have. But if the Conservatives could bring in, say, a lot of conservative-minded civil servants, they might actually get some things done without all these left-wing civil servants that are already in there still from the Blair years, blocking everything they tried to do.
Yeah, it's a real issue in a democracy, is who's running that civil government. Absolutely a big issue, and I'm not entirely convinced we've got it right here in the United Kingdom at all.
No.
Especially when we look at the results of things. Yeah. Well, look, it's the top of the hour. Thanks very much for coming in. Now, if people want to find you, they can find you on X, at x.com, and it's x.com/AKWriting88, all one word, and also on YouTube. And please do go to YouTube, folks, and follow Ash's site at youtube.com/thatprestonjournalist, all one word. And Ash puts out a lot of videos, doing a lot. How is your YouTube channel? Is it growing these days?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's on 43,000 now. Yeah, going very nicely indeed. Thank you. Yeah,
that's very nice. That's very nice, especially if you're monetized. I can imagine that's very good. Well, long may that continue. Long may that
thank
continue.
You. It's always a pleasure to come on.
Yeah, good. Well, I know that you've been appreciated. Thanks for interesting insight into the political scene today in the UK. Catherine says, great chat. And Mons says, Ash is great. Watch all his stuff. Fantastic. Eric, who might be a civil servant, says, not all civil servants are left-wing.
Yeah, I read that one.
well, grant there's one or two that are not, Eric. Absolutely. Good. Okay, Ash. Thanks very much. We'll have you back on again, no doubt. And
Cheers, Alistair. Thanks very much. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
See you later. Bye-bye.